Now comes to your time for some questions, and this is always an interesting period of the evening. We could break for a few minutes if everyone would prefer that, or we could move straight into questions. What does everyone prefer? Straight in. Okay. Who has a question? We should get our panel. You're okay there? Yeah. You can all see everyone. Yep. Okay. Does anyone have a question? Marie can pass around the microphone. And whilst you're thinking, I forgot to mention earlier on, there's a pad near the entrance where you can put your name down to be on the mailing list for future events. I forgot to mention that earlier on. Okay, we have a question over here. First taker. Thank you, sir.
I want to first of all, of course, thank all the panel for sort of a whole variety of different perspectives on the one topic. I want to ask a question I'm not sure is being devil's advocate or not. Is it that possibly that public art isn't even possible in a society with so many diverse communities and diverse nationalities and that the last piece of public art we could have had is the statue of Queen Victoria in King's Park, in which everybody understood exactly what it meant. And I appreciate that Marcus spoke about the polyvalency of his sort of rainbow bridge. Okay, you might have used the language, but beyond that, beyond symbols which are easily graspable, like the rainbow, is public art just a dead project and we should just be more focusing on niche work for specific communities rather than trying to pretend we can do one thing that helps everybody?
I don't know if I was targeted, but yeah. If anyone would like to bring me a glass of beer, I'd be forever in your debt.
Open the bar, Mark.
Okay, should work possibly target niche communities? Residing where? In internment camps somewhere?
Well, it's just the very idea that there can be a piece of public art to which can be so many responses. It used to be that, well, whether fictionalised or not, we believed we led in a white Australia, homogenous community, and therefore we'd all respond to the same symbols, the Christian cross, the statue. But nowadays, with such a diverse community we have, is it even possible to make a piece of art that is even worth trying for such a diverse community? I'm not sure whether it's a devil's advocate question or whether it's something I believe.
Yeah, I mean, this again for me personally, this is where I have some issues with overly didactic work, and really about some of the briefs that artists need to go for, because they're very narrow frameworks within which to respond and have a kind of if not a homogenising, it's certainly a grand narrative already attached to them. So, I mean, everyone has their own response and comes to given works from their own place. That's undeniable. Whether it's possible for works to talk to everyone, in some way, shape or form, they're going to be talking and related. Whether they're talking powerfully or not is another question.
I was actually just trying to go for an even simpler answer in that we already do this. I introduced you very briefly to my old grandfather. One of the things he said to me a long time ago was that our stories are your stories. We are of this place. If you come here and you call this place your home, or if you come from this place, this is your place. So can we all exist? Yes. Can we share stories in whatever format we should choose that might capture aspects of how we exist in this place? I believe so, yes. Does it have to be what the popular version should be at any particular time? God, I hope not. Did I say the G word? No. And perhaps maybe that's why I've enjoyed working with so many visual artists over the years, because it's actually that slice that we actually need to challenge what has been put there previously beforehand, in the sense of, and this is the form you will adopt. Again, God, I hope not, because this is our place. However it is we come here, whatever it is we bring with us, whatever bag we put down, that makes this place. Whether, I'm thinking of an example, perhaps if I was to make a giant glass spear tip and stab it down on Rottnest Island in a version, in my take on what Google might look like as a public artwork, I doubt that there'd be very many people who might get that reference. But is it important? Yes. Rottnest Island being what it was, for those who don't know about Rottnest Island and what it was, Rottnest Island was a prison for Aboriginal people. And over there currently at the moment, it's not unusual for people to trip over or find or recover glass spear tips made by Kimberley men who were taken there a long time ago. Does everybody need to know that? Well, some people might say yes, but most people don't. But it would be an important piece of work.
Oh, I would just say that the very fact that I still haven't mastered this, I buzzed through my whole, like mine was doing feedback the whole time I spoke. You guys worked it out. There, is that the right distance? I think the very fact, it's a really good question, and yeah, I think it is impossible. I think it's impossible. But I don't think that means it shouldn't exist. And I think by the very fact that it's in the public realm and can't please everybody and won't, and can't carry meaning for everybody and won't, it should stop trying to do either of those things. That's my simple answer, is that it's okay for it to be provocative and it's as productive for it to be hated as liked, but for it to be both procured and produced thoughtfully. I'm not going to say stop making it because you can't please everyone. I think it should continue to be made, but if it's public, like everything else in the public realm, it's out there to exist and for everybody to have their own response to. And the greater, I suppose, the accretion of those, perhaps the more someone will find something that they find meaning in. Having said that, though, I definitely agree with your point, Margaret, about there's a limit. There's a limit to how much we can take. It's a lot to absorb, it gets busy. So, yeah.
I just think I concur with Ron's remarks, really, that if a work has some meaning to the artist, and that meaning can be quantified in many different ways, that's what matters, because then they'll produce something of some significance and magnitude and importance, regardless of scale or material or whatever. And I think if you're prepared to do that in the public realm, then you're prepared for it to be misunderstood or understood, and meaning is perhaps not the most critical factor. And I take your point about, you know, a realist bronze or whatever that memorialises someone and that's completely understood by people. But I suppose I'm hoping that tonight we've kind of conveyed that there are many other ways of making art in the public realm, and they don't all have to be as specified in their meaning or their intent or their representation. And in fact, they can be quite obscure and obtuse and erudite and dangerous, I think Marcus said. And you couldn't help but make me think. I did attend the Black Swan Portrait Prize opening the other night, and the Premier actually said, and you know, I get this, I understand it, but we're sort of saying, oh, some of them, they're just great portraits, they are so like the person. And I was thinking, well, you know, that's only one measure, and you know, we know that portraiture is about so much more than just looking like someone. If you really capture a portrait, it may, in fact, not look like them, but capture the essence or capture something completely remote about them. And I think the more that we do, well, the more that we do, actually, the more that we apply art into all sorts of forms, the more you just open up the conversation and perhaps make it less predictable and help challenge people's perceptions of what a work might be or not be. And I don't think, you know, I'm with Marcus, I hate the didacticism of that, but I just think you actually just have to do. You just have to keep creating, you just have to keep putting it out there, and it won't always be understood, it may not have to have a meaning, but you know, art is art, basically.
Most, I think.
Yeah.
Kind of towards that to do with gentrification and stuff like that. When you think of gentrification, you think of cities like London and New York, where it happens so rapidly that by the time you know, the bourgeois have moved in or whatever, they've kind of already got their new hub and all these creative kind of bohos or whatever have their new place. I think in Perth it happens a lot slowly, and that can be a lot more dangerous. Like in places like Fremantle, where the gentrification has happened over such a long period of time that all these people have kind of moved in that don't really stand for what a place might have originally stood for. And the people who represented that initial thing don't have another place to move on to so quickly, or people don't have that kind of community that they can just move to and from. How do you think public art plays that, and like, how can those kind of people sustain the values that they perceive within Perth? If that makes sense.
I'm going to respond to a couple of bits separately, if that's okay.
It was delivered kind of separately, so yeah.
Yeah, but also kind of continuously, which makes it hard to remember what all the parts were. I think you're absolutely right. The process, most things here are a little bit slower and a little bit gentler, and happily a little bit less severe. Both the peril and the virtue of gentrification is that it creates, as you were alluding to, a constant movement, that there's the next place and the next and the next, and that those cycles aren't finite either, because perhaps somewhere that was gentrified in the 1960s is now not today. And so on that level, I think that's okay, because that's the process, and that's life, and that's the world. And the fact that those systems are mobile and that they flux might be seen as a positive thing. The other part of the question, the second part, was about how we respond. Can you?
Well, I guess because it's so slow, that these things kind of trickle through, and we start to accept more normalised or G-rated, as you put it, kind of public realm because of that. And the gentrification starts to take more power, with people maybe not realising as much, and so you do have these people in this normalised kind of G-rated society making these decisions.
Oh, stealth. You're saying it's like stealth.
Yeah, because it's slow, and it's kind of this slow death. And then
I don't think it's a death for a start. I think we're being pejorative if we think of it as a death at all. I think most of the time what Perth and Fremantle go through isn't quite gentrification, and that's partly because it's slow. There are finite renewal projects, and there are other places that, like anywhere else in the world, are under constant flux, which happens when generations get older and financial situations change and so on. I don't really know how to answer the second part, so I'm going to see if anyone else on the panel wants to address it. Did anyone have any thoughts on the second part of that question?
Okay, I think it's ambiguous, my bad.
You can, no, you haven't at all. I just think I'm a little fatigued because I got off a plane, so instead you can corner me later on and I'll try and answer it better.
Sorry. Isn't the danger of gentrification, pointing at like placemaking there, we're all gentrifiers. Most of the artists here are dressed quite well. So it's, when you're putting it remote, I would blame architecture on gentrification as much as artists. And then you expect the artist somehow not to be part of that, you call it an arts industry. I think I have a problem with the whole kind of presumption.
Affluence, is it called affluence? A very difficult one to comment on the motion. I think it's probably closer to consequences of being an affluent society.
I'll just respond to a tiny bit of that, which I wasn't saying it's up to the artist to reverse the process that others are setting in motion.
Fair enough.
And yes, architects are guilty, and they're at the helm of half of the projects that appear to have an absence of architecture. So we're all guilty, I suppose, because I was talking to an art audience tonight. I was trying to say, reserve the right to do other, and that I don't think that necessarily the construction of a brief, and these do largely call for meaning, and they do largely call for interpretation of place, and they often seem like they're putting, I suppose, an onus of interpretation on the art, and I'm saying, I guess I don't think that's necessarily fair. Most things have stories, and I'd like those stories or narratives to potentially be proposed by the artist rather than the brief writer.
Or the landscape architect and architecture.
Or the architect and the landscape architect.
Can I ask the panel, there's obviously a lot of dissatisfaction with the standard of a lot of the public art that has become abundant in both the city and the suburbs. Do you envisage any way in which there can be an intelligent critique that is not going to end up with a massive loss of income for artists? Basically, people who undertake these projects do not want to hear that it's failed.
I just think we should all get behind Margaret's plan, for starters. Precedents are great, like pilots are great. Nothing proves up the possibilities of something better than getting it out there. And I don't know, if you could, I mean, looking at, say, the development of a suburb, that the brief to put a range of public artworks at certain points in that suburban development, and that inevitably end up being incredibly safe and incredibly just, well, I'd call them invisible after a little while. It would be great if you could take the same kind of experimental rigour that's being applied to some of the stuff the City of Freo is doing with sustainable housing, and do some experiments where you let artists do, to coin your phrase, some batshit crazy stuff in the same kind of context, and see which delivers more value. I'd argue that people yearn for really exciting things within their environment, and if you put more exciting art into certain contexts, it just leads to better results all around. And who knows, maybe that becomes a source of inspiration for the developers and the architects and the landscape architects that are designing in response to, rather than artists plugging into something that already exists.
Yeah, I think I'd almost argue the converse, that unless we do something, you'll lose the money anyway. I sort of think we really should be looking for a much greater level of funding. And see, I think that's that fear factor, that if people are a little bit critical, it will go away. And I completely understand that, Helen, but I just think you've got to be prepared and second guess that, and actually go out on a limb, like I suppose I was talking about, where you actually increase the ambition, you increase the persuasion, you lift the level, you know. And I yes, it would sacrifice a few small projects, I think, but I'm not sure that's a bad thing.
Is it? I get the impression that in some places they back the artist rather than the piece, and that here you're submitting pieces and the committee or the council or whatever are safifying that down. And in other areas, some other parts of the world, they might be backing the artist, and then what comes out is, well, we weren't really quite expecting that, but that's what gets done. Maybe that's what we're not doing here. I'm not sure.
I'm all for backing the artists. And I know that can, on the surface, appear a little elitist, because you're, you know, hand selecting an artist, or you're inviting an artist rather than going through a, you know, competition commission. But I just think you can get the most extraordinary results, and that opens it up for everyone. You know, it's about shifting the ball game rather than just you know, small commissions here and there. And I think, and look, I haven't been in that network in Perth for a while, you know, selection panels or whatever. But, you know, I've so often heard when that democracy runs right a bit that there might be some amount of money that's available to some project, and there'll be people sitting around. Maybe this doesn't happen anymore, maybe life's moved on from it, but I've heard people sort of sit around and say, well, actually that's quite a lot of money, we could give that to 5 artists instead of 1 artist. And you know, that depresses me, because that's what I talk about, democracy causing a dilution of funding and, you know, minimising the outcome. And that's not going to improve the situation. It might sort of mean you've channeled more money to more artists, but you're only getting more disappointing results or less ambition. And I just don't think you can have it both ways.
I would like to ask people in here about the commissions and concept and budgets for projects and for the public art and projects. I was in Perth Modern many years ago, and when the city need some public art surrounding the areas, often ask us to have our students, and they should give us some paint, colors and something, have some sketches, put them into the area where this thing that was very blank. So we did all this almost every year in that times. It's quite long time ago. But I thought we should have a better organizations. We have a committee and developed our cities in a more organized, or maybe involves artists, like a professional artist, to work into these projects. Those that I don't know that this one is become a problem now or not. We still use the students, art students, for doing this one, or we already have some employ some professional artists to do in our city. So that's I ask. Today's who we're going to use students as students or artists for developed our public art.
Question whether we should be using more students?
No, I don't think that is not a good idea at all for getting students to do the public art. We need to have our professional artists who working really well into this, show the knowledge, the concept, and all this one go through from the city to our artists to work through with the project and proper way to do for public art rather than using students.
I think we'd all agree with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Shall we try 3 more questions? Okay, I'm here.
I want to pick up on that last point of Beth's, the notion of intelligent procurement. And I think, notwithstanding the pitfalls that have occurred along the way in the last 30 years, we've come somewhere close to intelligent procurement. In most instances, I can talk of Fremantle and in the city of Perth. The difficulty I have, and I know a lot of people here will have, is the way that certain established institutions have been able to work their way around the formats that we have established that guarantee intelligent procurement. And usually these are politically driven. And I have to congratulate both Marcus and Margaret for being able to talk at length with form without using another 4-letter expletive, because I think they are singularly responsible for negotiating circuitous pathways around our established intelligent procurement procedures. And the other one that I have to talk about is the way that government can directly influence council decisions And I suppose the most horrific example of this lives in Fremantle in King Square, where the Right Honourable John Curtin stands on a plinth and represents the worst piece of figurative sculpture in Western Australia and possibly Australia. Now, if we have intelligent procurement, why can't our committee, of which I've been a member for nearly 30 years, convince the council to intelligently remove that monstrosity? I think we won't go into personal folios. Anyhow, that's not so much a question as a comment. But thank you so much for sharing it with us tonight. Thank you.
Okay, I'll class that as one of the three. We've got two more.
I've enjoyed listening about the enemy within, because I think a lot of what we've discussed here is potentially arises from things that our own sphere of activity generates. In part of what I do, I spend some of my life living in another world, in the world occupied also by Jeff in development, etc. And we have been speaking here as if it's somehow the values of that world that contaminates what we produce as art. Perhaps I can share that the other world is passionately disinterested in what we are often doing, and the principles, the requirements, the procurement processes are those processes that somehow we've written. So the comment is, in the process of freeing up liberations, there seems to me to be a conversation about the fact we don't like the strings attached. Really, should we be focusing the conversation on simply saying, let's identify those strings and sever those strings so that we can get procurement, we can get funding, we can get money for great stuff to happen, and just further disengage the strings that then form the work that is produced. Sorry for the meander, but perhaps there's a response that the panel might offer.
I think that's a really interesting observation, Peter. And I'm kind of hoping that some of what we've said tonight, and look, actually I'm a bit conflicted, to be honest, because I know that I talked a lot about sort of the power of ephemeral projects as being a bit of a shift or a game changer, and I'm also a bit conflicted because I think, not every piece of public art that's happened in Perth is bad. There's a lot that we should celebrate, and we've tended to be a little bit more on the critical tonight, and maybe that was the nature of the evening. But I suppose when I was talking about the power of ephemeral, it probably allows for a different method of procurement, to use Beth's term, and to actually perhaps sort of sideline some of those existing channels that you're talking about in the architecture or urban world or whatever, or even the government world. And I suppose where I've seen successes is when there's been a whole range of partners come together to achieve the common good. And I've seen that happen with ephemeral work much more than I have with permanent work. And probably we haven't really talked about that tonight because they are very different scenarios. Now, a lot of what people have been questioning about tonight are more about permanent works and the permanent public art rather than the ephemeral. So, I am a bit conflicted in that.
There's it's easier to experiment in that realm. Yeah, there's less at stake, which is a really good point. I think outside the politics of what's driving certain procurement processes is, of course, finance. I think it would be an incredibly valuable exercise for an audit to occur of the money that's gone into public art over the last 5 years within this state, and work out what the percentage of that has gone towards the management of the public art. Because I think it's hefty in some scenarios and has led to limiting budgets for the actual work rather than expansive opportunities.
Sorry, I just wanted to piggyback on what you said there, because I think it's really interesting, and a thought that came to my mind was there does seem to be more of a capacity for experimentation with ephemeral art simply because it's not staying. What a fantastic way in, because so much permanent or enduring art in the world were things that were intended to be ephemeral, but were loved or even hated enough to stay. And I'm always looking for the sideways tack. So I kind of like that.
Actually, it's reminding me of something that, I mean, some people might be aware or familiar with, but it really does take me back to the Antony Gormley days. And you know, it's interesting because it appears that just sort of happened on site and existed in perpetuity. And it was far from the case. And you know, there were many hard-won battles to even have it happen, let alone have it remain. And I recall quite distinctly talking to Antony where things were looking very tough as to whether, you know, there would be any custodianship for it to remain in Western Australia, whether it was from government or state art institutions or whatever. And perhaps, you know, again, that had sort of come in under the radar to some extent, you know, it hadn't gone through all the checks and balances that perhaps we now have. You know, I think there's a whole history there. But I always recall that Antony said, well, if the state don't want it, if they don't want to continue to look after it, I want those pieces buried on site. And I always thought that was really the most powerful response, and it goes right back to that idea about meaning, because of course it's now endured, it's this amazing cultural destination, tourism destination. He did work incredibly sensitively with Indigenous community at Menzies, and you know, I think even I at the very beginning sort of thought, oh, you know, here we go, white British artist comes to do the work in the colonial antiquities and so forth. But, you know, on that journey, he was anything but that. But I've always remembered, you know, that a work of that stature and scale could so easily have not stayed there. But, well, it would have stayed, but it would have been buried. And, you know, I think that's kind of a rather powerful thing to reflect on.
This is a question, it's probably for Beth, but any of you can answer. Which is it's a question about arts. When we're talking about these arts projects, and particularly percentage for art, what seems to happen is that all these other disciplines do their work, and then as an afterthought, as you mentioned, we gift wrap it with some art, or we do some art to a place as an afterthought, and it kind of happens in isolation from all of these other disciplines. What are your thoughts on some of the movements coming out of America which involve architects and engineers and artists from the very beginning in multidisciplinary teams, where the artists' ideas and processes are really valued throughout the whole development of cities or places?
I think that I utterly agree with you, because, you know, I think your opinion is clear from the way that you pose the question, and I agree. I don't think it should be anybody's job to polish someone else's turd. Sorry, it's getting late. No, I think that it's, you know, there are some circumstances in which reacting to something is generative, so I wouldn't want to say don't ever make art as a kind of appendix to other things, because there could very well be something intriguing to say in that situation. But what you're basically saying is, you know, that surely it's preferable to engage earlier than for someone to be provided with a pre-existing condition on which to put a thing. And I don't think art should ever be the putting of a thing. And so, yeah, what's fundamental there is it shouldn't be gift wrapping, it shouldn't be written in as a way of kind of shifting or ameliorating or changing the relationship between a piece of architecture and the street or the public realm. And magic things happen when people collaborate.
Thanks. It can go very wrong though, especially for the artist. And it can be a process where the convenient wall for them to do something on within the architecture is identified, which is a shame. I'm pretty excited about the potential of what's going on in the state right now. Went to an amazing lecture last week as part of Knowledge Week at the City Perth Library. It was all about the square kilometre array. It blows my mind that within 50 years from Western Australia there'll be data that assists us to look at the edge of space and time. And that 187 astrophysicists have moved to Perth already, and we're 10 years off that being built. Looking at all the visuals of that extraordinary thing, what struck me is, good God, that's ugly. It's just awful. Wouldn't it be amazing if some artists were engaged to possibly work into that landscape at the same time as this amazing, the largest science project in the world at the moment is being developed, so that, you know, when people won't be able to get to that site, but there will be a lot of images around, and you know, having had the opportunity to experience the Gormley out at Lake Ballard and other moments across this state, that would be amazing. That would be an incredible collaborative approach. You know, the new gallery at the top of the Kerry Hill Tower on Elizabeth Quay is going to offer extraordinary installation opportunities. It's an exciting time.
And the other thing too is to in amongst all this conversation, don't forget that actually there are quite a few of your arts consultants out there are saying all of the same things. They're fighting the same fight. They sit at a table, and I've sat with them, where they're trying to convince a group of people who are counting all the nuts and bolts and the dollars being spent that actually this is a process best handed over to artists. Okay? There perhaps maybe another group of people that should sit where I'm sitting, that they can actually be empowered by you lot to go and fight this a little bit harder. So don't dismiss that quite so easily.
Okay, time to wind up. First of all, on the